Hello, and welcome to the Atlantic Debrief, the Atlantic Council Europe Center's internet show and podcast on the most pressing issues impacting transatlantic relations today. My name is Nicole Lawler, Assistant Director here at the Europe Center. We're excited to be hosting a mini-series of debriefs following the release of our report, Transatlantic Horizons, a collaborative US-EU policy agenda for 2025 and beyond, which aims to set a productive vision for transatlantic relations, offering forward-looking recommendations for the next US and EU administrations. To discuss her contributions to the report on the green transition, I'm delighted to be joined by Carol Schaeffer, Nonresident Senior Fellow here at the Europe Center and Fellow at the Family Jain Institute. Carol, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I'd like to jump right in and start by asking the basics. What is the bottom line of your essay, and why should Washington and Brussels care about the green transition?
So the bottom line of my essay is essentially that climate change isn't going away, and the need for green transition also isn't going away. There have been some important steps that have been made, but they really aren't doing enough. There's more that needs to be done, and in particular, there needs to be something that is truly cooperative and not just piecemeal, because the need for the green transition, the need to address climate change, because it is a global issue, must be addressed globally. It must be addressed at least at the supranational level rather than at the national level. And that's a huge, huge challenge.
Absolutely. Yes. You cite in your essay a number of spending figures that Europe and the United States have committed, but you say at the same time that the sort of the scale of investment required will need to be greater. Can you explain to our audience what Europe and the United States are getting right when it comes to the green transition, but still what needs to happen, especially when it comes to ramping up spending?
So the Inflation Reduction Act is really like the cornerstone piece of what the United States has been doing in order to address climate change. And there's a lot of great things within it. And the EU has also responded with its own deal, essentially, to focus on making incentives to foster competition and investment in green industries, especially with the European Green Deal. The problem with these is that they're both operating simultaneously and almost by definition without collaboration. And while they are both remarkable initiatives in their own right, there needs to be something that crosses those boundaries and those borders. And the reason why they're not doing enough is also a lot of what's being done at the IRA and the Green New Deal level is essentially focused on a cap and trade system. A cap and trade system is great in a lot of ways, meaning that the government sets a limit or a cap on the total amount of pollution that can be emitted by certain industries. And then companies are given permits that allow them to emit a certain amount of pollution. And then if a company produces more, they can essentially buy back permits or trade back permits from others that don't do as much pollution. And this is meant to be a kind of incentive to reduce pollution in the most cost-effective way and help protect the environment. But the problem with it is that it's often complex in terms of setting up administration to keep that cap and trade system accountable. Companies might be able to manipulate the market for permits, driving up prices unfairly. It can include uneven impact, uncertain environmental impact. I mean, there still is pollution that is happening. And it essentially allows some to buy their way into allowing for more pollution. And the prices for permits can fluctuate. and distribution of permits might be unfair. So what I'd like to see and what I've proposed is something more like a mutually accountable spending plan.
Yeah, you'd mentioned in your report several times a sort of NATO-style spending pledge for the green transition, and you just mentioned it now. Love to just hear your thoughts on what that might look like.
So I guess the idea behind a NATO-style spending pledge is something like shifting the conversation around climate change and the way that climate change functions. Like, I think we all know that it's an urgent threat, that it's going to cause damage to our cities, to our coastlines, to trade, to economics. But I don't think that it's often framed within this language of security. And I think that security is a major element of climate change, especially when we think about the polar ice caps melting. And I mean, there are repeated demonstrations of military force by Russia in partnership with China that are happening at the northern poles. The polar ice caps melting does open up a major line of weakened defense, essentially, for allies, for NATO allies. So the idea behind NATO, like a NATO-style spending, is that we're all in this together. And so what that could mean is that we have a collective pool of resources that will change infrastructure for all of us, industry infrastructure for all of us, decarbonization for all of us. And it also means that if there's climate disasters, we are all accountable for managing the climate disasters of each of us. There's a clear problem for some that might see this. For example, the Netherlands might be more climate susceptible to rising tides than, say, Hungary is, which is landlocked. However, there are other forms of climate disasters that are attributable to climate change, I think, that everyone can be concerned with. And this sort of mutual climate fund would incentivize forward-looking transitions, forward-looking green transition, funding it, because funding is also such a major challenge, while also providing relief.
Yeah, that's interesting. Sort of switching gears a little bit, you had mentioned in your report that the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act and the EU's Green Deal are actually pretty complementary, and therein lies an opportunity to pursue joint investment opportunities in green technology, for example. While the U.S. and the EU have certainly been pursuing more industrial policy, their approaches to industrial policy and climate policy, for that matter, certainly differ. We've seen as a result negotiations around the U.S.-EU critical minerals agreement, around the global arrangement on sustainable steel and aluminum stall. So I guess my question is, is there a realistic path forward for the U.S. and the EU to pursue ambitious decarbonization efforts together? What sort of challenges do you foresee there, and can they be overcome?
If there is an effort to cooperate on some key areas, so for example, green technology innovation, that's something that the United States and Europe, I think, could pretty seamlessly find ways to collaborate on. And if that doesn't somehow get in the way of some of the more isolationist goals of the Inflation Reduction Act, for example, these sort of self-contained ways of stimulating competition, if there can be ways in which outshoots of these programs can bring together collaboration, then absolutely there can be ways for the United States and Europe to collaborate. And I think that would be beneficial for everyone.
Yeah, no, thank you for that answer. And sort of a related answer or question rather, if we look to the future, what do you think policymakers, both sides of the Atlantic, should be sort of looking out for, paying attention to when it comes to decarbonization, the green transition, sort of opportunities lie there?
I think setting up a transatlantic set of standards about pollution and emissions standards would be a great place to start. I know that that's been in the works, but it's very hard to get all EU member states and the United States to agree on that, especially when it's, so transatlantic. But getting an agreement on that would be a really key place to start. Looking for electric vehicle manufacturing partners that operate in good faith and won't hold the energy transition hostage to other demands is also a key part of this. So, for example, the northern states have a battery plan. The Scandinavian countries have like a battery plan that's cooperative and pretty horizontal in its planning, and that can include a lot of trade, especially when it comes to electric vehicle manufacturing, that would be beneficial for the United States to support and partner with.
Certainly many opportunities to explore, especially for the next commission as it sort of gears up. And they've made the green transition a kind of core focus. So I'm hoping that, some of these ideas can be explored. I think that's all we have time for today. So I'd like to thank you again, Carol, for joining us for this edition of the Atlantic Debrief. But I'm sure we'll continue the conversation for future iterations. And also thank you for your contributions to the report. We're excited about that too. And just want to thank our audience also for joining us. Stay tuned for more Atlantic Debriefs, for more takeaways from the report. And yes, do follow us and we'll continue with this endeavor. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much.